Hey guys, another gloomy Friday out here in Virginia. Friend said he was stopping by, so he's never been here before. I'm putting some reflectors by the weird trees in my driveway so he doesn't lose a mirror on his big ass truck. It's important to take into consideration whatever you're hosting. Oh no, what's this? About 65 yards away. Is that a bad guy? I hope not. All I have is my stock Glock 19. Oh well, I guess I'm gonna have to engage and save the family. Take that, bad guy. Since that worked out all right, I think it's a good time to talk about how you're probably missing not because of your equipment, but because of your skill set. So let's talk some fundamentals and how they come into play. Good morning. Last night started earlier than I thought and finished way later than I intended. So now I'm recovering. I'm sure you know how that is. Maybe you don't. So I'm going to try to break these into smaller videos that are easier to digest. Not going to be a lot of fancy shooting, just talking about why we miss. These are just basic Glock sights. There's better sights out there. But basically you're going to have a rear sight that looks like this, flat across the top with a little channel in it. And in that channel, you'll be able to see your front sight. Now, when people talk about perfect sight alignment, they're talking about this. The front sight is evenly spaced, even space here, even space here with the rear sight, and flat across the top. So this is what your sight alignment should look like. Equal height across the top of the three posts, the front sight and the rear sight, and then equal light between the rear sight and where the front post is sitting. For the sight picture, what we've done is we've taken the top of these sights and aligned them with the center of the X. Also, you notice the sides of both the front sight post and the rear sight post are aligned exactly bifurcating the target intended. Now for these demonstration purposes, I'll be using this as our bullet. If our point of aim, point of impact bifurcates our target, bullet would strike as intended. Sorry it's not exactly to scale, but I'm doing the best I can here. The second aiming scheme is the lollipop, or 6 o'clock hold. As you can see in this aiming scheme, the equal height, equal lights should still remain the same, but in this case, we're putting our front sight post at the bottom of the intended target, and you can see where the bullet would end up. Point of aim, point of impact is going to change depending on what the height of your sights is and how your gun is actually manufactured. I know, for instance, my Glock 19 fires like this. So now that you've seen the two different aiming schemes that are most prevalent when it comes to iron sights, now I'm going to explain why you're most likely missing your shots. So when it comes to shooting accurately, you'll come across two problems. Usually it's not equal height, equal light. So when they draw from the holster and they aim in, the sights come up on target, if the target was my nose for some reason. So during the firing process, it's super important to keep that equal height, equal light. It's where we run into trouble when it comes to accurate fire. So while I'm moving my trigger to the rear, those sights are going to become misaligned somehow. Now, most people think this has to do with that perceived movement that they see in their gun. Most likely the trouble they're having is during the firing process, when they start to move the trigger to the rear and they intend to put a shot on target, they have some sort of angular deviation in that equal height and equal light. This is not the problem. The perception of the sights moving around between your eye and the target is not really going to cause that much of a problem when it comes to accurate fire, especially in a home defense situation. Now with bullseye targets, it's a little different. You really have to pay attention to your movements. But for all intents and purposes, let's say we're all out there with a defensive mindset. So when it comes to dealing with a threat in your home, you're not going to have any problem with this. This is what's going to cause your issue. And I'll show you how in a second. Assuming that this evil man has entered my home in the middle of the night and intends me or my family harm, we can see how either sight picture, whether it's bifurcated or that lollipop we talked about earlier, will give us about similar hits on the heart, chest, and lungs, which is where we want to be. Pretty much anywhere inside of that gray area is a pretty good hit, especially if we could put multiple rounds on target. In our normal movement, which we see as this, we can see that no matter where I end up, if it's here, we still have a pretty good shot placement. If I move all the way over to here, like this, we can also agree that's a pretty good shot, especially if my first shot was in the heart, the second shot was in the second place, and that was my third shot. We'd all be pretty happy with that. My first shot on target, I'm going to have equal height, equal light, and I'm going to try to place a round right into the center of the bad guy's chest. On that third vertebrae inside of the heart. I'm going to try not to disturb my sights at all, nothing fancy. I'm just going to press that trigger to the rear without allowing those sights to move, and we'll see what we get. Good grip. Pressing out, equal height, equal light. Let's see how that worked out. As you can see, first, second, third vertebrae, as promised, in the center of the heart. I was about 21 feet out because we're talking about defensive shooting here, and that's the average engagement according to the FBI. For my subsequent rounds, I'm going to do this. I'm going to keep my sights aligned, equal height and equal light, but I'm going to allow my hands to move around way more than what you're seeing when you're trying to take that same shot. I'm going to keep my sights aligned, left to right, equal height, equal light, and I'm going to move my hands. Now, I would imagine that none of you are having as much of a problem with moving as I am now. I'm going to move my hands and my feet. All I'm doing is making sure that my sights are aligned, and I'm going to take a couple of shots without disturbing the sights, and we'll see what we get. So, as you can see, even with that extreme amount of movement, as long as I keep my sights aligned, equal height, equal light, while I press the trigger to the rear, you're still going to get acceptable accuracy. Now let's show you why you're missing. It's that angular deviation we talked about earlier. Now I'm going to hold the gun as steady as I can, but I'm going to use that angular deviation to show you that that's really what's going wrong with your shots. And then later we'll talk about why it's going wrong. So from a perfect sight alignment, I'm going to still aim in originally at that heart, but I'm going to raise that front sight till the bottom of the front sight is even with the top of the rear sight. And we'll see what happens. Still aimed at the center of that heart. Okay, now I'm going to take that front sight and I'm going to lower it till the top of the front sight is even with the channel in the rear sight. Aimed at the center of the heart, lowering that front sight. And I'm going to bury it behind the side of the left of the rear sight. Aimed at the center of the heart, burying that front sight. Bury it behind the other side of that rear sight. All right, so that's all 4 shots. I've done all. You can see the original shots I took while moving my feet and hands to the extreme while keeping the sights aligned are black markered. However, the new shots, the angular deviation shots, were taken about 10 feet closer to the target and are at the extreme of the left, right, top, and bottom of the target. So you can see where angular deviation can be a real problem. So what happens under sympathetic squeeze? We get our perfect height, perfect light, and we start to squeeze the trigger. And when we do, we also squeeze harder with the rest of our fingers, pulling the trigger, pulling the trigger, pulling the trigger, pulling the trigger, bang! And the gun will go off, giving you those low left shots. We're going to start off with perfect height, perfect light, aimed in at the plus at the top of the A box. Once again, we're about 20 feet away, give or take. We're going to do this one-handed so you can see what's going on for the purposes of this demonstration. Starting off with good sight alignment, sight picture. As I begin to squeeze, instead of just manipulating my trigger finger, I'm going to squeeze with my entire hand, and we'll see what happens. Would you look at that? It's low and left. Another common mistake we make is anticipation. So you're trying to fight against the recoil of the gun before the gun even goes off. What happens is you'll be pulling the trigger, pulling the trigger, pulling the trigger, bang! The gun will go off here, giving you a shot in the guts, or maybe even lower when you're trying to hit them in the heart. Let's see what anticipation of recoil looks like. As you go to pull the trigger, you're trying to fight the recoil before the gun actually goes off, and you push the barrel of the gun straightish down. Once again, from only a couple yards away, you can see how much drop you get in that bullet. So if you were like 40 feet away or so, you probably hit him in the groin if you hit him at all. The third most common mistake made while manipulating the trigger to the rear is called heeling. As you begin to manipulate the trigger to the rear, you're pulling the trigger, pulling the trigger, pulling the trigger, bang! As we press the trigger, we're going to accidentally heel the gun, causing the round to go high. Pretty darn high. So of course these errors are made in split seconds during the trigger process. Nobody pulls the trigger this slow while they're trying to take a shot. It happens usually right after you hit the wall, but before the gun actually fires. We'll go into detail with that a little bit later, but I think you've had enough for now. These videos aren't that exciting, but they are hopefully educational. And by education and growing your knowledge, you'll be able to eliminate your mistakes and become a better shooter. Thanks for sticking around this long. Hope to see you in the next one.